Hello everyone, welcome to our first International Neuropsychological Society Student Liaison Committee mini-webinar series project. My name is Dr. Kalliopi Megari and I'm a Global Engagement Representative of the SLC for Greece.
Hello, my name is Maximiliano Folmer. I'm the other Global Engagement Representative of the SLC. So, do you all know, this is the first series of a project that Kalliopi and I started a few months ago, and we would like to thank all the SLC representatives and to the INS for their support in this initiative.
So, let us introduce ourselves. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Western Macedonia and University of Ioannina, both located in Greece. I'm also a member of the Ethics Committee of the Hellenic Neuropsychological Society.
In my case, I'm a licensed psychologist in Argentina. I currently work in a clinic assessing patients and designing neurorehabilitation programs. And I also conduct research on cross-cultural neuropsychology at the Catholic University of Córdoba within Dr. Alberto Fernandez's team. Please keep in mind that there will be more call for abstracts in the near future for the next mini-webinar series. So make sure to follow the Twitter and Facebook from the SLC to stay tuned about the latest news.
So, let's welcome our first presenter. Afik Furman is a fifth-year PhD student in clinical psychology with an emphasis in neuropsychology at Palo Alto University, California. Afik's research centers on understanding the neurocognitive mechanisms of psychopathology and clinical symptoms. In his dissertation, for which he was awarded the American Psychological Association Society for Clinical Neuropsychology Division 40 Dissertation Award, Afik investigates the relationship between neuropsychological profiles and sleep perception in insomnia. His work could provide neuropsychologists and sleep health clinicians and researchers a better understanding of insomnia symptomatology and the ability to use neuropsychological evaluation to better tailor individualized treatment for insomnia and related disorders.
In addition to sleep, Afik has utilized the same approach to better identify responsiveness to non-pharmacological treatment. In the study he will discuss today, Afik explored the cognitive characteristics of those who tend to benefit more from hypnosis-based treatments. Through his work, Afik is adamant about emphasizing the benefit of neuropsychology for other fields of science and healthcare. Besides his love for all things neuropsychology and the human mind, Afik enjoys hiking, camping, and even just walking in the nature. He's an avid space nerd and would love to talk to you about space psychology and practices meditation and mindfulness regularly. So with no further ado, Afik, the virtual stage is all yours, so you can start your presentation.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you, Kalliopi.
All right, so it's time to talk about the study. The title that we gave to the study was The Neuropsychology of Hypnotizability. That's my interest in that case. Executive Functioning and Information Salience. I led the study with the guidance of my mentor, Dr. David Spiegel at Stanford University. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the lab later as we go on. So first of all, important to talk about that, right? When I say hypnosis, some people might think mumbo jumbo, some other people might think something ominous or mysterious. And this is actually been covered in surveys about beliefs and attitudes about hypnosis in college and in university populations. And there's a lot of myths and misconceptions that people tend to have about hypnosis, and it's no one's fault necessarily. It's because how hypnosis has been depicted in the non-fiction and fiction literature, pardon me, and in stage performances, where the element of mystery is part of the success of the show, let's say. And there's actually recent evidence from 2020 that show that people's perceptions of hypnosis are actually affected by their level of exposure to scientific evidence about hypnosis. So as much as this is a soapbox of mine that I would love to talk to you about, talking about what hypnosis is a longer and fun, but again, longer discussion, cognitively and neurocognitively. Today, I'm going to focus about hypnotizability. So hypnosis treatments or hypnosis-based treatments are a great alternative for, let's say, pain or anxiety, and some evidence supports smoking cessation and other clinical symptoms or clinical disorders that are traditionally being treated with through pharmacological approaches. And hypnosis offers a non-pharmacological alternative to it, which is great, but not everybody benefits equally from hypnosis-based treatments. And one of the factors that plays into how much a person will benefit from hypnosis-based treatment is hypnotizability, which is a highly stable trait that represents a person's ability to experience suggested phenomena, whether subjectively experience or observably, behaviorally experience something that I can even notice. I can make a suggestion that, as you listen to my voice, your hand starts to rise up. And in the context of hypnosis, a lot of people that are highly hypnotizable are likely to experience a movement in their hand, and also behaviorally, so we can see that it happens. Now, in the clinical context, being able to successfully experience suggestions given during hypnosis translates to higher likelihood of benefiting from hypnosis-based treatments. And that's kind of where our interest as clinicians kicks in. Now, hypnotizability distributes relatively normally in the population, with some portion of the population low hypnotizable, and it depends how you define hypnotizability and what instrument you use to measure it. But let's say between 10 to 20% of individuals that we measure are categorized as low hypnotizable, which means they're less likely to experience the suggestions given to them during hypnosis. And about the same part of the population, let's say 10 to 20%, again, depends how you measure hypnotizability, are categorized as high hypnotizables, which means they're more likely to experience suggestions given to them during hypnosis, and then they're more likely to benefit from hypnosis-based treatment. Part of the research that we're doing at the lab, at Dr. Spiegel's lab, which I'm not going to talk about today, but it is important to mention, is how can we augment, enhance, or modulate hypnotizability so that other people can benefit from hypnosis-based treatment, even if temporarily, so that we can offer more non-pharmacological treatments for people, let's say, with pain syndromes or other syndromes that hypnosis is evidenced to be effective and efficacious for. But for today's discussion, one of the issues that we've noticed is that apart from actually measuring hypnotizability, which takes time, it takes training, obviously, we have no way of indicating how much a person is likely to benefit from hypnosis, which is a problem because we want to have all clinicians the ability to say, based on this measure, based on this fill in the blank, it seems that you might be more likely to benefit from these treatments. So maybe you can consider that either alternative to pharmacological treatment or complementary or integrative, other treatments that can be added on top of other treatments, and so on and so forth. Now, the rest of the population is what we call medium hypnotizable. And I'm going to take I'm going to put on the neuropsychologist in training hat for now, because I am asking, what is hypnotizability? Cognitively, neurocognitively, what is hypnotizability? If we can understand what it is, maybe we can have a correlate of that, and we don't actually have to measure hypnotizability every time to tell someone how likely they are to benefit from hypnosis, right? And again, for the other type of research, cognitively, what is hypnotizability? Because if we can modulate that, maybe we can increase the likelihood of experiencing suggestions. So when we look at the literature, hypnotizability has been studied mainly through the lens of cognitive science and in a lot of super cool paradigms and measures. And these investigations focused mainly on processing speed or reaction time as the measurable aspect of cognitive abilities. It actually showed pretty interesting findings that high hypnotizability might be associated with shorter reaction times in simple attention tasks, and slightly delayed or variable delays as the task becomes more and more complex. Sounds familiar as a neuropsychologist, right? Keep that in mind. There's not a lot of evidence regarding untimed cognitive abilities. There's some in verbal memory, but not so much in terms of executive functioning, problem solving, and even attentional abilities that are not timed. So that prompted me to ask, so what is hypnotizability? Let's try to work from the conceptual idea to how we can design an experiment to test this. So let's, again, the more hypnotizable one is, the more likely they are to accept a suggestion given to them during hypnosis. Now, that means that accepting such suggestions, or in terms of accepting something that is being conveyed to them that is different than what their experience or know to that point, requires them to basically accept a new rule, a new logical rule, and inhibit whatever they had in mind before. So for example, if I tell you in the context of hypnosis, so this is not hypnosis, this is just a given example, as you listen to my voice, you can notice your eyelids become heavier and heavier. Now, some of you may say that is not true, because this is based on my experience, that is not true. Individuals that are highly hypnotizable are less likely to be, let's say, critical towards that suggestion, and are more likely to accept it, particularly in the context of hypnosis. So they're almost better in alternating between one logical rule to the other, and then inhibiting the old rule, right? And again, neuropsychology hat, what does that sound like? It sounds to me like perseveration, or the lack thereof, right? If perseveration is insisting on implying a previously learned logical rule, even in the face of corrective feedback or alternative feedback in that context, it sounds like individuals that are highly hypnotizable are less likely to perseverate. They are more likely to just move along and accept the new suggested rule, okay? And in the example I gave, the new rule is, as the eyes close down, as you listen to my voice, it means that the eyes will close down, or the eyelids will close down. So what, before we jumped into hypotheses, I tried to see if there's some even different kind of evidence, even not from the neuropsychology standpoint, that can maybe support this. So I went to neuroimaging, and I've learned, based on recent but also lesion studies that are decades old, that the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC, participates in what we call executive control. And again, this is a very superficial introduction given the time restraints, but I'll be happy to talk more and more deeply about that if you have any questions about that. And once the paper is out, you can actually look at the evidence more deeply. Under review at the moment. The anterior cingulate cortex, this is the bluish region here, different parts of it participate in different aspects of monitoring or information salience, basically orienting attention to what is important at the moment. The interplay between the DLPFC and the ACC, the executive control network, and the information salience, the salience network, their interplay has been hypothesized to represent the process of conflict resolution. We can talk more about that if you have any further question. And the right inferior cortex participates, and the right inferior gyrus as well, as a part of the right inferior cortex, has a role in cognitive inhibition. This was a really exciting map to look at, because these regions have all been independently associated with hypnotizability. Some research came out of our Dr. Spiegel's lab, and some other came out from different labs across the world that show that hypnotizability, or different levels of hypnotizability, are manifested in different functions, measurable functions in fMRI and PET scans in these regions. Now, that doesn't tell us much beyond the fact that hypnotizability and these perseveration and cognitive inhibition might have some shared real estate in the brain. But that might support a hypothesis that says that, conceptually, hypnotizability and perseveration share some cognitive mechanism between them. It sounds like what they do overlap to some extent. Obviously, they're not the same, but it sounds like there's some element that is shared between them. So based on the evidence that we already had about hypnotizability and what we predicted, again, putting the neuropsychologist's hat, I hypothesized that higher levels of hypnotizability will relate to less perseveration, right? That's the opposite, more acceptance of neurological rules. Shorter reaction times and simple attention tasks, that's what we see from cognitive science evidence, and an increased slowing effect on as cognitive complexity increases. So to conceptualize this, I'll talk more about that. I chose the TMT, the trail making test from the DCAFs, because you have simple attention conditions or trials, and then it increases into a set shifting element where the complexity increases, the demand increases. Our sample was 72 healthy adults who were either low or high in susceptibility to hypnosis and a group measure. Our sample was, I'm going to show you in a second how we chose them. Then we moved to do an independent individual hypnotizability measure. And that's just a joke here for some of you that remember this name. So we actually recruited 545 participants. We excluded medium participants, medium susceptibility to hypnosis, which was, again, the majority, given the normal distribution of, as I discussed later. We had some exclusions for missing data and missing age or education or hypnotizability scores. These people went through individual hypnotizability measure. And then these are the 72 people that we have data for. And then they were given different types of tests, both psychological testing and neuropsychological testing. We had valid scores for 54 people for Wisconsin car sorting test, which I'm going to describe in a second, and the DCAFs for 70 people of these two samples. So just out of convenience, we named them subsample 1 and subsample 2. I'll show you in the table in a second. So neuropsychological testing used the Wisconsin car sorting test and the trail making test from the DCAFs. Perseverative responding was captured through age-corrected scores, the standard scores for perseverative responses on the Wisconsin, and perseverative erroring. Self-shifting performance, which is the more complex attention task, was operationalized through the trail making test condition 4, right? The letter number sequencing, which is the most demanding trial of the trail making test. Obviously, there are other cognitive functions that play in the letter number sequencing, but comparing it to, let's say, condition 2, which is basically just letter or number tracking, depending on 2 or 3, it is more demanding in terms of cognitive resources. We use multiple hierarchical regression analyses to look at the Wisconsin card sorting test variables, perseverative responses and errors, and the scaled score for the TMT for each condition as dependent variables, and then we used as predictors the hypnotizability measured by the hypnotic induction profile, which is a 0 to 12 measure of hypnotizability. 12 means more, 12 is highest hypnotizable, 0 is lowest hypnotizable. And then we included age and years of education as covariance because we know that both age, particularly because we don't have age correction for the hypnotizability. So just to, in case some variance in hypnotizability was due to age, and years of education because we know years of education actually explains some of the variance in neuropsychological function. So subsample 1, this was the Wisconsin card sorting test sample, and subsample 2 is the trail making test. This is our demographics, as you can see, fairly similar. There were no significant demographic differences between the subsamples or the larger overall sample in neither demographics or neuropsychological or hypnotizability performance. As you can see, scores are intact and average. They did fine. But when we look at our model, so our linear regression model, again, this what you're seeing in front of you is a linear regression model including the hypnotizability, age, and education. It was significant, statistically significant with p-value of 0.047. R squared, or the explained amount of variance, was 14.6%. Again, not a huge amount because hypnotizability and perseveration are not identical, but they have some sort of shared mechanism. In this case, 15%, almost 15% of the variance in perseverative responses on the Wisconsin card sorting test was explained by variance in the hypnotizability measure, and not by age or education. As you can see here at the bottom, they were insignificant. Only the HAP was significant. There was no concerns about multicollinearity or random errors. Again, in the paper, you can see a little more in depth what we did. Importantly, hypnotizability, the model did not significantly predict trail making test condition 4. I didn't put the graph here to not suggest that there was a significant finding, but we did find a non-significant trend. P-value was 0.08 in the direction we expected it. So because it's the more demanding, cognitively demanding condition of the TMT, we expected more highly hypnotizable individuals to perform lower, and that was the direction. But it was neither statistically significant nor informative, since R squared value was fairly small. It was 0.04 or 4% or something like that. So what does that mean? That means that we found an inverse relationship between trait hypnotizability and perseveration, as at least captured on the Wisconsin card sorting test, which is an executive function that utilizes regions of both executive control and the salient systems, which again corresponds back to neuroimaging evidence from hypnotizability. It suggests that hypnotizability shares a common cognitive mechanism with this ability to do error evaluation and implementation of new logical rules, step forward to understanding what hypnotizability is. And it was supported by our neuropsychological data. We also provide evidence that hypnotizability, which is a trait that is mostly addressed in the context of hypnosis, has implications out of hypnosis, because nobody here was quote unquote hypnotized during the cognitive testing. It was just conceptual testing of cognitive abilities. And obviously, we need more research into the neuropsychological profile of hypnotizability. Eventually, we might be able, just looking at cognitive profiles, to say, you know, this cognitive profiles fits into the high hypnotizability groups that we've seen in the literature. So there's actually a chance that you might benefit more from hypnosis-based treatments if you are willing to consider it. This is a provider-patient discussion can be made. Our distribution of hypnotizability scores was heavily tailed, heavy-tailed and negatively skewed, which means most of our participants were high on the hypnotizability or higher on the hypnotizability scale. And that's why we didn't do a comparison between the low and high hypnotizables because we had a relatively small amount of low hypnotizables. So again, for future research, we need to have more representative groups of low, medium, and high to better understand the trajectory. That's why we chose to go with regression, to see more of a direction rather than comparison of mean effects. In terms of the sample size, obviously bigger sample sizes might be more informative, but also more diverse sample size. So this sample size was not clinical. It was, as you see, the mean age was 24-ish. People came to the university settings. Many of them were students. So it doesn't necessarily translate to the entire population. So I want to say thanks to obviously my mentor, Dr. David Spiegel, and the lab staff and team, which are fantastic and couldn't do it without them. And thank you for our funders, the NIH, the NCCIH in particular, the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. Part of this study, this sample was collected for a neuroimaging study, which is cited here from the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, the Randolph Chase Fund, and the J. Rose Phillips Family Foundation. Thank you for listening to my rambling about neuropsychology and how it can be translated to other clinical fields. And here are the references.